Of the Inspector General and Steve Anderson. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Steve Anderson. Appreciate the opportunity to appear today. I was previously appointed as Medicaid Inspector General by Attorney General. I have been appointed by Attorney General Chris Kobach. I was previously appointed by former Attorney General Derek Schmidt and confirmed on April 6, 2021. I've got a whole list of stuff. I know this committee's time is valuable. I'd be more than happy to, you have my written testimony, be more than happy to stand for questions if that would work for you, Madam Chair.
Committee, are there any questions for the Inspector General? Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just like to share with the committee that I've had the pleasure of working with Mr. Anderson on several issues. I found him to be very competent, very helpful, very knowledgeable, and I support his renomination wholeheartedly.
Senator Clifford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for being here this morning. I know you've had some testimony in the House regarding increasing your authority, or at least the breadth of your inspections. How was that received?
It's the bill, House Bill 2217, is currently working its way through the process. Hopefully it'll make it over to the Senate before long. But I think it's being well received.
Thank you. Good luck with it. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Senator Holscher.
Chair, thank you, Steve, for being here. I do have a couple of questions. And we've obviously seen you in government efficiency presenting some information there. So I know that it's been well established that intentional fraud by individuals for Medicaid or other programs is rare. And I know you've talked about SNAP and some of the other programs out there. So we have the situation that there are errors sometimes that occur. So my question is this: in order to reduce errors by agency staff, will you support additional resources or state agencies so that we can ensure that applications are quickly processed accurately?
Well, obviously supporting anything like that would be the legislature's decision. When we do some of our audit reports, we will point out if we think that there is a lack of staffing. And we've certainly done that in prior audit reports, but as far as making a commitment going forward, I don't think that's in my authority to do that.
Yes. Senator Holscher.
I also know too, in government efficiency, you have pointed out some situations where actually it's the MCOs or contractors where there may be issues. What are your plans to address those situations?
With additional staff, we have audits planned, in fact, this coming year to look at the MCOs. We have an audit going on right now that's going to be wrapped up. It involves the MCOs and how they're processing prior authorizations for hospital stays. So we have plans to look at those because they are contractors well within our authority area, and certainly an area where there's an awful lot of tax dollars that go toward that. So we are definitely interested in looking at those processes. And Senator, if you're aware of a situation that would be useful for us to look at, we'd be happy to address it with you.
Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for being here, Stephen. I want to echo the comments of Senator Erickson, and I believe that you're doing a great job. And I think you expressed some frustration in government efficiency that a lot of times your recommendations are not being heard. And I don't know if there's anything you could suggest that would, going forward, help us root out some of these fraudulent cases that you bring to light.
Sure. I appreciate that, Senator Thompson. There are suggestions we had made that if the Inspector General's office would be more engaged with some of the decision-making, certainly issues that are tracked within the Bob Bethel Committee would allow us to be involved in some of the processes and what makes it onto the issues list that are followed by the Bethel Committee would be useful for us to be involved in that. We'd also even talked about the CanCare contracts, about being involved in developing those contracts and looking at what the provisions are and the safeguards that are built in for the MCOs as far as what they're supposed to do or not do.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Petty.
Thank you, and Stephen, good to see you. I know we haven't always been on the same page, but you just mentioned about the Bob Bethel Committee, which I have had the pleasure of serving on for a while, and our chairs this year. but I'm having a difficulty understanding what you would be referring to outside of Medicaid with the Bob Bethel.
No, I was talking about with the MCO, issues we've developed in our audits that we've done involving strictly Medicaid, which would go to Bob Bethel, is one findings we've had on our audit reports where we've identified overpayments. We don't have the authority to force that. That is something that would require the legislative action to pursue. In the Bob Bethel, if you recall, they have KDADS and KDHE will get up and they'll have their issues that are going through. And I'll give you an example of ks, which is their system that KDADS uses for tracking functional assessments for waiver recipients. We identified in our report 2 years ago that that program or that mechanism didn't work correctly, and it's being tracked on that list, but we had no involvement in what makes it onto that list, nor are we involved in any of the resolution that comes about from that. And that's a suggestion that I'd made to the COSH committee, that it would be helpful if our office had some input on what made it onto that list and what some of the, when they clear something off that list, being involved in that process as well.
And I'm not on government efficiencies, and that's been brought up, but one of my issues has been, is that so often some of the things that that you have talked about are things that are within systems that we have in government already that have the ability to investigate. And just as when we looked at a report at the Bob Bethel this last week, there were only 4% of the number of people that are serviced under Medicaid where there were potentially that would make it to the level of potentially going to court. And so it seems to me when you look at a system that's almost 500,000 clients, that's the reality is whether it's, it doesn't have to be government, whether it's any kind of business, that the 4% level is a very low level of any kind of potential fraud.
Senator Petty, like I had said at Bob Bethel the other day, and respectfully, I think your math is not accurate. Am I talking loud enough? Sorry. The math that you're using isn't accurate in that we're looking at the number of participants, 457,000 people. The number of complaints and allegations we have are just that. We don't know about all the fraud that exists, nor do we have criminal cases or cases against every possible issue because I simply don't have the resources. I have 2 special agents and 1 investigator and an analyst right now doing all those. And I have testified we could easily open 200 or 300 more cases if I had the resources. And again, it's about getting people to make those allegations and make those referrals. Every year, the number of complaints we get has gone up, and that continues to go up. So we really don't know how big the percentage of fraud is. It's certainly bigger than 4%. Most experts agree that it's far more than 4% of the fraud. And when you're looking at a $5.5 billion program, even 10% is $550 million. So I think investing a little extra money in my office to help stamp out that fraud, I think it's a sound investment from that standpoint.
Just as a follow-up, so I think that also says that that department already has investigators. They already have the ability to investigate potential fraud. And some of the issues that have been brought up, for example, enrollment, we know that we're a state that has 12-month enrollment. So if you want to put that in the category, that's, I mean, to me, that's kind of offline because we, don't have that system. That's not the system that we have. And I would, and so I'll just end with that. But you are another layer. And I'm not sure that always, so I guess we could always go back to KDHE and say, okay, at your level, what kind of fraud have you seen as well? So my point is that I do not see the necessity to keep expanding the level of investigations into potential fraud when we have that in departments already. And we talk about government efficiency, I'm not sure that it is, but I know you serve a role here, and I understand that. I just don't see the point of expansion of your department.
Senator Thompson.
Yeah, just a follow-up on that. I mean, the more eyes we get on fraud, the better we're going to do. Even a little bit of fraud, in my opinion, is fraud.
Yes, sir.
And we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. We're not talking about insignificant amounts. 4% of a very large number is still a fairly large number. And having an independent set of eyes looking at this is always a good thing, particularly when we're talking about taxpayer dollars and people taking advantage of it. I think you related one situation where there was a guy who was registered for some public benefits in 8 different states, as I recall.
So we see that on the Paris report.
So even rooting out that one instance gives people some pause about violating the rules of the game. So I appreciate, Madam Chair, having those independent eyes. I think it's necessary for government to do that. And I think in the last election in 2024, there was an overwhelming mandate from the people of the United States to do that, which is why we're looking at government efficiency and efficiencies of this nature, and why I think this position is necessary, and I fully support the reappointment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
We have time for one more question. Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Anderson, I'm looking at your testimony, and it says that your office has identified approximately $300 million in wasteful spending, $6.3 million in overpayments, almost $25 million in potential savings. You've had 34 findings. You've opened 285 criminal investigations, 218 involving eligibility fraud, 31 involving beneficiary fraud, 32 involving provider fraud, and 3 involving state employees. You've also referred several fraud cases that could result in civil recoveries of over $60 million. My question to you, Mr. Anderson, is if the agencies have these safeguards in place, would they have caught that without your position?
Apparently not, because we're the ones that found it. And it's pointed out sometimes that the federal people will come in and do audits of the Medicaid program. They audit very narrow things. Their focus is very narrow. We look at things that the feds don't look at. That's why we find all these issues that you've seen here. Nobody was doing investigations of Medicaid eligibility prior to my office starting that a year and a half ago. KDHE did not have anybody to do that at all, and they refused to do that. And even if you look at their policies, and I've talked about this in different groups, is they look at error, agency error, client error, fraud error. And if it doesn't get referred to for criminal prosecution, then it automatically reverts back to agency error. So if you ask them for their number of clients that have committed fraud, the answer would be 0. That's in their policies.
Committee, ordinarily, if we have a new appointment, we take a couple of days to let everybody review the testimony, et cetera. We have a reappointment like this, we can go ahead and vote now. If we have a motion, we have 3 choices. One would be approve and consent. The next would be not approve and not consent, and then a motion to pass out without recommendation. Do I hear a motion regarding Steve Anderson? Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I approve we move the reappointment of Mr. Stephen Anderson as Inspector for Medicaid. What was the first? Approve and consent.
Seconded by Senator Clifford. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The motion has been approved, and we are passing out with approve and consent the nomination of Steve Anderson. Thank you, committee. That closes that part of the meeting, and now we will open up the committee meeting on House Bill 2068. We have 4 conferees. You will each have 4 minutes, and we'll begin with William Wilk. I am not sure. Jenna just said, "Are you sure?" She's going to give us a quick bill brief. Thank you, William.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, committee members. This is House Bill 2068, which enacts the Cosmetology Compact to provide for interstate practice privileges to cosmetologists. These may sound familiar as we hear a couple, seems compacts every single year, and you'll probably be getting a couple more from the House. And so I'll just briefly go over the articles. Article 1 states the purpose of the compact. Article 2 provides definitions for terms used throughout the compact and the definition of cosmetologist. And subsection C is an individual who is licensed to practice cosmetology in their home state. Article 3 sets out criteria for member states to participate in the compact. And these include that the state license and regulate cosmetology, and that licensees within a state pass a cosmetology competency exam prior to being licensed. Article 4 sets out the criteria for a cosmetologist to receive a multi-state license. These would include agreeing to abide by rules of the state licensing authority and the state scope of practice, paying required fees, and other requirements that the commission may provide. Article 5 states the criteria for the reissuance of a multi-state license by a new home state and the steps a licensee shall take if the licensee changes their home state. Article 6, this is on page 6, states the authority of the Compact Commission and member state licensing authorities. Article 7 gives the ability for a member, or outlines the ability for a member state to take adverse action on a multi-state licensee based on investigative information, current significant investigative information, or adverse action of a remote state. Article 8 states that military members or their spouses shall designate a home state, and that the military member or spouse may retain a home state during active duty licensing. Article 9 provides for the establishment and operation of the Cosmetology Licensure Compact Commission. Article 10 requires the commission to provide for the development and maintenance of a coordinated data system for all applicants for a multi-state license in all member states. Article 11 requires that the commission adopt rules and regulations to implement and administer the provisions of the compact. Article 12 sets out the rules for oversight, dispute resolution, and enforcement of the compact. That's on page 18 of the bill. Article 13 states that the effective date of the commission is upon passage in the 7th member state, and that occurred in 2024. I believe it was after we finished with the session last year, so sometime in the summer last year. And it also includes procedures for a state's withdrawal and amendment of the compact. And the way a state withdraws from a compact is the same way they get in, which is passing a bill. Article 14 contains a severability clause, which this committee is familiar with. Article 15 provides that nothing in the compact will prohibit or inhibit the enforcement of any law or regulation in a participating state, and this bill would become effective upon publication in the statute book, which is July 1st. There were no committee amendments or committee of the whole amendments, and it passed on a vote of 119 to 1, or 119 to 0. I'll be happy to answer questions.
Any questions for Jenna Committee? Senator Petty.
Thank you. And Jenna, this matches the compacts from the other states that have already passed it?
Yes, that is a requirement. And we have some little unique things that we do. We don't use the word must, we use the word shall, but they're all minor changes that were approved by CSG.
And then just as a follow-up, I was just, under Article 8, which deals with the active military members, it says the individual may retain their home state designation. So does that allow the military to then, the military person, spouse, to choose and change the home state, or to choose the state that they are then practicing in?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator. So Article 8 would allow a military member or their spouse to designate a home state if they have a current license to practice cosmetology in that state. And then they can retain that home state designation during any period of that service when either that military member or their spouse is on active duty assignment. So even if you have to move because your partner or the military member themselves are on active duty, you could keep that home state designation even though you might not live there anymore. But to have a home state designation, you have to have a license in that state.
Thank you.
Other questions for Jenna? Seeing none? Thank you, Jenna. Welcome, William.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is William Wilk, Senior Director of Government Affairs for the Kansas Chamber of Commerce, and we appreciate the opportunity to provide proponent testimony to House Bill 2068 this morning. So some background information. So the Kansas Chamber formed the Military and Veteran Affairs Council in 2023, and the mission of the Military and Veteran Affairs Council is to provide a unified voice to support and grow our state's military institutions and to build stronger relationships between the service member and employer communities. One of the legislative issues that came up through our council in the off session was these occupational licensing compacts. So the way that these work is they just help streamline the process for military spouses that are moving across state lines. So if one state passes that occupations compact and we pass it as well, then they can opt into the compact to have their license recognized in those states. And it also helps with shortages of workforce. So, according to recent data, Kansas has seen a decline in 2.9% of cosmetologist licenses. And so in closing, we just believe this is a necessary step to increase the access to cosmetologists for Kansans, along with streamlining the licensing process for military spouses. It does not change any of the Kansas licensing requirements or the continuing education hours. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, William. Next, we have Lieutenant Colonel Keith Marshall. Welcome to committee.
Morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Lieutenant Colonel Keith Marshall with the Adjutant General's Department. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and testify in support of this bill this morning. In 2023, Congress passed the Military Spouse Licensing Relief Act, and what that bill intended to do is provide licensure portability for military families across all 50 states. Because of how often military families have to move and the high unemployment and underemployment rates for military spouses. So this is one of the compacts that is resulting from that and trying to ease that burden on our military families. So we support it for all military families. For Guard families in particular, we do recruit from active duty. So we recruit nationwide from currently serving active duty members and have them move to Kansas and join the Kansas National Guard. So this eases the process for those families when they do that, as well as our National Guard families when they go on active duty and may have to move to another state for a while and then move back to Kansas. So this is a good bill for all military families and for National Guard families, and we just would appreciate your support on it. And with that, Madam Chair, I will stand for questions at the appropriate.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we have virtually Michelle Rickert.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Thank you. Madam Chair, honorable committee members, my name is Michelle Richard, and I'm the Midwest Region Liaison with the United States Department of Defense, the State Liaison Office. We operate under the direction of the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. We stand in support of the Cosmetology Compact and the policies reflected in House Bill 2068. This policy change addresses licensing issues affecting our service members and their families. Licensure issues for our transitioning military members and their spouses have been a priority for the department for several years. Occupational licensure compacts provide consistent rules that allow licensed members to work in other states through privilege to practice policies or to transfer their license more easily to a new state. The military provisions added to these compacts assist those military spouses and members to participate in the occupational compacts. As our military members and their families move from state to state, obtaining licenses for employment is very important. Military spouse unemployment is approximately 21%, much higher than the national average. These compacts will serve to relieve one of the many stressors of a military move and support military families' financial and personal well-being, in addition to adding to the mission readiness of our armed forces. We are grateful for the tremendous effort that Kansas has historically made to support our military members and their families, and we appreciate the opportunity to support the Cosmetology Compact. Again, thank you for your support, and I stand by for any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And since you're virtual, are there any particular questions for Michelle before we let her go? Seeing none, thank you, Michelle.
Thank
Next-
you.
Next, we have Leslie Rosti. Welcome to committee.
Chair. And you got my name right. I'm pretty impressed by that, so it's pretty rare. I have provided you with written testimony. In that included was a map of the current states that participate in the compact, so should you have any questions about who's already participating and where we have active legislation, it's available. I represent the Future of the Beauty Industry Coalition in support of House Bill 2068. I represent many employers in your state who hire cosmetologists and often have difficulty staying fully staffed. I'm also a proud resident of the state of Kansas and eager to see this important legislation enacted. I understand there may be, at some point, some concern. I hear this around the country. The one question of concern I get is upholding the standards of a state. I am a nurse by training and worked as an infection control nurse prior to coming to the professional beauty industry 15 years ago. Clearly not a cosmetologist. I just play one on TV. Since that time, I have worked as a subject matter expert on health and public safety in the professional beauty industry, during which I helped over 30 states rewrite their, including Kansas, and update their health and public safety rules and curriculum for students. I also served as an item rater and evaluator for the national licensure exams and wrote science content, including infection control, for both major textbooks used in the cosmetology theory education. My experience across the states can attest to the fact that all states have similar curriculum and, in fact, rules when it comes to health and public safety. For example, infection control in this industry has almost no variance from state to state because options for how to properly clean and disinfect in a professional beauty setting are extremely limited. This narrow focus means that the exams taken across the country address and assess health and public safety, including infection control, in a very similar manner. While there is variance in education and requirements across the states, there is not variance in the exams that are required for licensure. This legislation, which is considered the gold standard for licensed mobility, allows employers to draw from a larger pool of employees, allows cosmetologists who come to Kansas to work, get to work immediately, and reduces workload related to reciprocity applications for our regulatory agency. In addition, the compact's use of required comprehensive database also reduces the risk of licensure fraud and therefore improves health and public safety for our consumers. If the compact were passed, you would enact the only form of licensed mobility that is bidirectional and considered the gold standard for mobility by the military. In fact, it is the only form of mobility that actually benefits the constituents of the state of Kansas, allowing them the same benefits you currently give to licensees coming in from other states. While no states like their citizens to leave, there are simply times where it must happen, and this compact would benefit that resident tremendously. While some of the benefits of the compact are obvious for licensees, including the military spouse and even the state, by reducing reciprocity processing and providing a licensure database, some of the other potential beneficiaries may not be so obvious but are very important. We have heard extensive testimony in the last 2 years about the very real benefits to survivors of domestic violence and licensees displaced by natural disasters. For survivors of domestic violence, the ability to move quickly and anonymously may be life-saving in an industry which is 85% female. The compact would provide the ability for them to work today and with tips have money in their pocket tonight, which can provide groceries, a meal, or even a hotel while they get on their feet. In addition, as we have all seen lately, natural disasters like Hurricane Helene and the current California wildfires create a displacement of people who need to work and may have resources like family in the state of Kansas where they could move and not only begin working but also fill vacancies that currently exist. The compact approach to license mobility provides clear benefits to licensees moving to Kansas, businesses in our state, and even the state itself. But most importantly, to your own constituents. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee, that concludes our oral proponent testimony. There is testimony from the president of the Kansas Council of Chapters of the Military Officers Association of America, as well as the National Center for Interstate Compacts. Do we have questions for our conferees? Senator Clifford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Leslie, would you come back up? 2 questions, if you'll indulge me. I think we have a little extra time. We have a pretty high bar in Kansas of 1,500 hours. Is that pretty consistent across the country? Will the compact impact that at all?
So the compact will not impact ours. One of the things we were very clear when we wrote this language was to allow every state to retain their sovereignty in terms of the things that are most contentious, if you will, hours, types of education. So things like high school programs and apprenticeship, those types of things would be however you give your license in your state, I think about driver's license. If I'm safe enough to drive in Kansas, I'm safe enough to drive in every state, right? And so that 1,500 hours is approximately 80% of the states. There's 3 states that have more than 1,500 hours, and there's 6 states that have less than 1,500 hours. So the vast majority of states fall in that. But back to the exams they take are all the same. So if the concern is safety, that is met.
Thank you. And the second question, have you seen the Chris Rock movie Good Hair?
Yes.
And I would recommend it to anyone in that profession. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's a new one. Okay, do we have additional questions for any of our proponents committee? I have one. This is for anyone who can answer. About how many cosmetologists do we think might be coming into the state? Has anybody made an estimation of that at all? William, do you want to come to the podium? You're looking at me like, I have no idea. Just curious.
Coming into the state, I don't know. I was able to research and find just a decline that we have in Kansas, but I'm happy to do some research and get back to you to see how many are coming.
The reason I'm asking is I'm just curious because within our military, if they've taken a poll of how many spouses have a cosmetology license, how many spouses, because we have 4 compacts that have come in before us this year. And by the way, congratulations on getting 119-0 on the House side. But I just curious of, if they've taken a poll like this would affect this many spouses, even they're not necessarily coming into Kansas, but
I'm happy to
surely
reach
they've
out to
taken a
the
poll.
CSG and the Department of Defense to see if they have any data on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Committee, any other questions? Seeing none, thank you so much. This closes the hearing on Senate Bill 2068, and committee, we are adjourned.